and I'm pleased to welcome here all of you on behalf of Pan-European Reconquista Movement, Militant Zone and Plomin Club. This is the third edition of our annual Pact of Steel conference, and now we continue this tradition in our winter Kyiv on the eve of the ASGARDSREI festival. As I would say, a special kind of black metal festival, you understand what I mean, already seventh. It is no surprise that we gather here prior to the musical part of our event, because you know very well that the Pact of Steel conference cycle has never been a purely musical event, just like black metal as a genre in its original form has never been only music. It has always been something about music, containing its ideological and spiritual foundations in the musical philosophy and the very matter of this genre. We know that Pact of Steel conference, and not only the conference, first of all, the ASGARDSREI festival, and Pact of Steel as an idea of the union alliance between Western and Eastern Europe was born not in Ukraine but in Russia. However, increasing oppression of Russian nationalists by Putin's regime soon closed this opportunity. And the rebirth of ASGARDSREI festival, timed to winter solstice, happened in the post-revolutionary Ukraine. And now we can see, looking back, that since 2015, when we witnessed its rebirth in Ukraine, this festival actually overgrew its format. We know that this day it will be already a 2-day and even 3-day festival. After the conference, we'll attend the Cabaret Noir show in Monterey Club. And this year again we had to search for much bigger venue. Yet this event, this common efforts by Ukrainian nationalists, Russian nationalists who came to support them, Belarusian nationalists, apart from resistance to the common enemy, I mean Putin-led Russia, it gave birth to something bigger. And I mean the strategy of the great European Reconquista. In 2016, this strategy transformed into the geopolitical program of Intermarium, the union of Central and Eastern European countries, as a platform or a springboard for all European Reconquista, for the alternative pan-European integration, the end goal of which is the pan-European confederation of sovereign nations, or simply Pan-Europa. In 2016, in Kyiv took place the first Pan-Europa conference, and since then this tradition also continues. And this event, I mean Pact of Steel conference and ASGARDSREI festival, is unimaginable without the feat of Ukrainian nationalists and their comrades from Russia, Belarus and other Western and Eastern European countries who came to support them, who risked their lives and even who laid down their lives, not only for independence of Ukraine, but first of all for the rebirth of the entire West. And this is our duty now, to make sure that their sacrifice was not in vain. Last year's conference, Pact of Steel Conference 2, was called After the Darkest European Hour. Indeed, we believe that this longest and darkest European night will end sooner or later, as we call it the Iron Age, the Kali Yuga, and after that will begin the new dawn of Europe. That's why these natural cosmic cycles, and in particular the day of winter solstice, after which the day becomes brighter and longer, it promises us this mythological eternal recurrence, this rebirth, this new dawn. And not only this, we know that heaven worldview as such itself, it shows us the way out of this emptiness of European nihilism brought by secularized desert religions. We also know that heaven worldview and the very European genetic code in its archetypal purity, first of all, it is represented in the Nordic countries. And we are lucky to welcome today Fróði Midjord from Faroe Islands, the famous founder of Scandza Forum, which is, among others, focused on the Nordic identity exploration and rebirth restoration. Also the host of the Guide to Kulchur podcast. He attended our conference, made an honor for us, to come here and speak about heathenism, Nordic paganism as metaphysics. So in his speech, he's going to highlight the metaphysical foundations of heathen worldview, of heathenism, and among others, he will refer to the philosophy of Martin Heidegger, who is also a prominent thinker, showing us the way to our true spiritual homeland. The second speaker of our conference, who's on the way here, Hendrik Möbus, also well known for you, musician, intellectual, publicist. He will have right after our conference a rehearsal. He will be getting ready along with the Absurd band for the performance as part of the ASGARDSREI festival on weekend. And while he's coming here, I'm also proud to say that I'm really glad that the previous editions of ASGARDSREI festival inspired him to return to the public space as an intellectual, because this person really demonstrates the unity of theory and practice all of us need. I mean, regular festival goers, as I would say. Although I know very well that most of you are not regular festival goers, you are activists, persons with strong worldview and principles. But anyway, it's really symbolical that we witness this rebirth in the public space, and our legends of black metal return. Not only legends of Teutonic black metal, but also, as I said, intellectuals ready to convey this worldview. So Hendrik Möbus today, he will speak about another symbolical topic for the Reconquista movement, for Pact of Steel conference, Roman von Ungern-Sternberg. We know that, and we often say here in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe, that the sun of Europe rises in the east, and this white god of war, this Mad Baron, as enemies called him, Roman von Ungern-Sternberg, he knew very well where to find spiritual and vital forces for the resistance against the Red Plague and the degeneration of the modern world in general. So we will begin now with the first part of our conference cycle, Pact of Steel, which is dedicated to the heathenism, pagan worldview, winter solstice mythology, and then we'll proceed to the Reconquista part, to the Pact of Steel between Eastern and Western Europe, to this strategy of the Grand European Reconquest. So I will finish my introduction, and I would like to invite Fróði Midjord to speak about Nordic paganism as metaphysics.
We're approaching Christmas, which has for a long time been one of the most sacred parts of the year for Europeans, for Nordic peoples, and we're starting to see Christmas commercials. If you're in America and Europe, they'll be with race-mixed couples, always. I don't know if that's a feature here, hopefully not. I would hope that. But you know, it's become a sort of a symbol of progress. Everyone is extremely happy, and you have basically homosexual couples having children in these TV commercials for Christmas, and it all seems kind of empty. It's just a sort of a glossy surface that is not even very glossy anymore. And behind and underneath the surface, people are taking antidepressants at a level like never seen before, and people are isolating themselves, not really participating in the world, and women are not having children, and our politicians are basically urging us to accept mass immigration to replace us because we don't have children of our own, at least in Western Europe. I don't know the figures here, but I mean it's quite bad. So it would seem that the modern world is a reductio ad absurdum of the theory of progress, that everything is getting better all the time. So somewhere along the way, we took a wrong turn somewhere, and that's what we're going to talk about today. My explanation of that, at least. I'm glad to see that you guys are not in the same bad state as a lot of Northern Europe, Western Europe. which has completely lost its spirit. I mean, obviously you guys have gone through a lot of hard stuff, but I mean, it's probably better to have a fighting spirit and fight rather than to lose that fighting spirit and lose the will to power completely and just go voluntarily to your grave. So I want to thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. It's been so far. I only arrived yesterday, last night, and it's been very inspiring so far. I've seen what you guys have, which is completely unimaginable where I live and the places I've visited before. So that's very impressive. I'm going to talk about paganism as a metaphysics. That's a big word, and it's not really as mysterious as it might sound. Metaphysics is the entirety of a worldview, sort of like if you've heard of the term paradigm in science, for example, that a paradigm is the framework that you have for the entire discussion of a subject, basically, and metaphysics has meant a lot of different things throughout history, and it means still today, of course, different things depending on the context you use it. What I mean is just the fundamental values, the starting point of your discussion when you discuss a worldview or when you discuss a perspective on the world. So I don't mean anything supernatural or anything like that. I just mean the fundamental framework, basically the axioms of your discussion. My philosophy that I call paganism, and I should add that I'm not going to talk about any sort of religious rituals or anything like that. I'm going to talk about paganism as metaphysics, as a worldview, so as a perspective on reality, basically, and the world we live in. And my philosophy starts with a concept called thrownness, Geworfenheit in Heidegger's terms, basically. The idea that we are thrown into the world. Now that is, perhaps it sounds very esoteric and mysterious, but it really isn't. To understand it, we will just contrast it with the opposite, which is the tabula rasa perspective on how humans work, and which is the fundamental aspect of liberalism. Now, the tabula rasa idea about humanity is that we are born as blank slates. We are born as empty sheets of paper, and we can choose who to become. So basically our job is to write our own life story and decide who we are to be, and decide where to go. So basically everyone starts at the same starting point in life, and we can make our own decisions about what we want to be and where to go, and only our imaginations sets limits for what we can be and where we can go. And it usually involves rejecting things that are seen as confinements, like traditions and family and so on, that those are seen in the modern liberal mindset and worldview, those are seen as limitations instead of anything beneficial. As opposed to the tabula rasa, as opposed to this blank slate mindset, is what Heidegger calls thrownness. The idea is that at the very start, when we start to exist, we exist already with family connections, we exist with a history, we exist with social connections, with a tribe, an ethnicity, a race. a lot of things that we don't choose. And those things are usually, what I would say, what makes our life meaningful. And the modern worldview is based on rejecting those very things. It's based on pretending that our family doesn't exist, it doesn't matter who you are, your social relations don't matter, your tribe doesn't matter, everything is basically just a social construct, and you can just disregard those aspects of life. And I hope that is that can convey, that example or that illustration can convey something of what I mean by, or what, yeah, the term comes from Heidegger, that already when you start to exist, you do so with inner reality. No two people start from the same place. Everyone starts in the middle of the world, already with lots of connections that you don't choose, loyalties that you don't choose, and that is your identity. You don't choose your identity, you're born with it. And that's why he used the term Dasein, being there. No human is born as a blank slate. Already when you're born, you are at a specific place. You don't just exist, you exist in a specific place with specific connections, with specific roots, ethnic connections, tribal connections, and so on. And basically there has been a sort of one can make a distinction between an individual basically and a person. The modern world, the sort of economical idea about humanity is that they are individuals, they are interchangeable, sort of like economic units that can be moved over national borders and so on. Because those roots don't exist, while a person is a person with those connections, with an identity ready-made when he is born. So, how did we end up where we are now? I would say that it started with a fundamental shift in a mindset that started with Christianity. So, before Christianity, people had rejected religious entities, rejected the gods and accepted new gods, and there had, of course, not been complete rigidity in religious aspects. But what was new with Christianity was that when you accept Christianity, you're forced to reject your roots. This is also illustrated by the fact that Christianity starts with the year 0, to sort of illustrate that nothing that happened before Christianity matters. So it's a severing of the roots, cutting off your roots and starting anew. And that creates a sort of a shift a paradigm shift in the worldview of humans, a spiritual paradigm shift. And as Nietzsche pointed out, and as I agree, all the revolutions that have happened after that have been a part of this very Christian spiritual revolution. So basically, if you see Christianity, the Christian revolution as a big circle, you can all the other sort of political revolutions and the gender revolutions and so on have happened within that circle. There are smaller circles within that circle. That's how I would illustrate it. And some people would see Christianity as conservative today, but that's basically in the same way as a revolution that has been successful becomes entrenched, and those values want to preserve themselves, so they become belligerent against outside views, basically. Just like modern art is based on a lot of modern art theory is based on the idea that you're supposed to rebel against traditional theories, and you're supposed to rebel against the established norms in society. But since those norms now have become, the norms of rebellion against those norms have become the new norms, art today, modern art today, defends those values against anyone who wants to question them. In the same way, Christianity has become quote-unquote conservative, but it is actually the most fundamental revolution of them all, which is because no other revolution has been able to start from year zero and sort of disregard everything. There are historians who want to start study of history at the French Revolution, basically, to start from zero, because everything that went on before that was sort of irrelevant, because the real history of ideas started with that very point. And it's the same thing with Christianity. It's built on rejecting your roots. Now, after Christianity, if we move forward to the French Revolution, also that's also an example of severing roots with history. You start at basically an armchair philosophy type situation where you imagine what a good society would look like, an abstraction, and then you impose that on society and you disregard political history. So you cut the head of the king. It's all of these actions are very symbolic, of course, and you sort of you cut off tradition. Edmund Burke, who wrote about the French Revolution, I mean, the French Revolution is not the first, and it's not the only, of course, but it's a symbolic. It has a symbolic value, so I use it as an example of this type of cutting off history at the political level. And Edmund Burke had a description of this, which was that basically politics had developed through a natural selection, basically. So that things that were stable and worked over a long period of time took up an existence of their own. And when you cut off those things because you imagine that something will work, you just destroy what actually works. And that's obviously completed, well, at least to some extent, with the communist revolution is just an extension of the French Revolution. It's an extension of the same mindset. Welcome. Right. And then we can move forward to the 1800s, thereabouts, with the revolution in culture and art, with modernism, which is also based on the idea that you're supposed to reject the roots, rebel against the roots, not continue, not build on the roots, not build on the history. You're supposed to reject history and start from anew, basically. You revolt against traditional perspectives and instead of creating understandable narratives, you create chaos and you play around with structure in art, like the Dadaists, just creating complete chaos instead of having a sort of comprehensible narrative and modes of representation and so on. It's built on rejecting history. And if we move to the post-Second World War era, now the turn has come to biology. We're going to reject who we are biologically. So your ancestry, your genes don't decide what race you are, because race is a social construct. You're not born as a man or a woman. You're supposed to choose, make up your mind, your own mind, about if you're a man or a woman, and so you're left basically with nothing, and you're left with nihilism. And I would say that Christianity, as an attempt to combat this, would only be a very temporary solution. It's not the fundamental solution. It's sort of like if people would say that things were better in the 80s, which they probably were in many places, but it's like, yeah, we didn't have, things weren't just as insane as they are today, but still things were not good, and we were heading in this direction. So it's still built on the very fundamental mistakes of on the level of worldview, basically. And one of the interesting aspects of this idea that we're supposed to make up our own minds about what humans are, and we're going to reject tradition, we're going to reject history, and we're just going to take an abstract, universal view and just make up our own minds about what humans are, is that they're built. This new image is always built on a utopia which rejects and ignores certain parts of human nature. And one of the aspects that's supposed to be rejected by the modern worldview, by liberalism, is what Plato called thumos. Plato divided the human soul, the human characteristics, into three parts, basically: the mind, intelligence, the appetites that are sort of situated in the stomach, and thumos, which is situated in the chest, which is the spirit, the fighting spirit, sometimes translated as anger, and it's the fundament. It's the basis of nationalism. It's the basis of pride. It's the basis of wanting to fight against that which offends you. And basically, when you do a thing like that, it's always parasitical to some extent, because even the worldview that rejects that very thing has to appeal to that thing to establish it, to fight for it, to impose it on others. So even liberalism that's based on pretending that thumos doesn't exist has to appeal to masculine values and pride in order to impose that very liberalism on others, to get people to fight. It's sort of like Stalin, of course, appealing to nationalism in order to fight the Second World War. Because then you have to appeal to some sort of pride to get people wanting to take action, basically. So it's always parasitical. And since we're here for a festival on black metal, I think it's appropriate to just draw a parallel to the very aspect of thumos, because it is represented by it's an expression of anger. It's a symbol of anger, and it's a symbol of aggression and the wild parts of human nature that Christianity and liberal democracy and polite society generally wants to pretend that those aspects don't really exist. I think sometime in the 90s, he described the phenomenon of black metal as a resurgent, as an atavism, basically, a resurgence of the wild hunt, the ASGARDSREI, which is quite appropriate for this occasion. Because during the wild hunt, people were, young men were always sort of, they dressed up in they painted their faces as corpses. They were supposed to represent their dead ancestors. They created a lot of noise, wreaked havoc around them. I'll just read you a little quote from that essay. So this is he quotes a research article about the wild hunt. Those groups have various means to approach the other world, to reject a religious ecstasy, disguises, masks, noise, intoxicating beverages, movement and music, but also invocatory formulas similar to magical chants, etc. With their disguises as well as their behavior, the masked ones want to demonstrate they represent supernatural entities and not human beings. They dress as ghostly as possible, speaking with a falsetto voice, reaching ecstasy by dancing, music, and noise. Their clothes should be as nightmarish as possible. They attempt to dress as ugly as possible. They had terrible eyes with big white rings or painted up with charcoal. End of quote from him. All these characteristics are also elements in black metal music which came into existence in Scandinavia and above all Norway at the beginning of the 90s. Many black metal musicians paint their faces in demonic, black and white grimaces, dress in ancient Nordic clothes, or adorn themselves with emblems of death, which often results in kitsch. The falsetto voices of the ASGARDSREI are recalled in the ghostly voices of many singers, usually a sinister blend of whispered words or hoarse cries. So, the point is that this thing that the Christian culture and polite society, liberalism in general, had sort of pretends doesn't exist, and rejects, had a sort of spontaneous resurgence within young men who felt the urge to express the warlike and aggressive and angry aspects of human nature. And when the sort of mainstream black metal bands and musicians, when they become part of polite society, there are always people who would find that they are not very interesting anymore, and so they want to seek out something that's properly rebellious and actually is transgressive and is a sort of a rebellion against the modern world values, which brings us here today. And we see what happens when people reject that part of human nature which is symbolized by thumos with anger and so on. The Western nations, United States, Europe, European nations allow themselves to be invaded and completely destroyed because they have lost the will to show anger and aggression, and they've lost the will to fight. And with this nihilism that we see everywhere around us, it's like people seeking some sort of consumerist culture to fill the void, seeking alternative identities. But I would say that those things could never work. There's Steve McNallen usually calls it coming home, to just embrace your roots, your religious identity. And it's like a person lost in the wilderness trying to find his way somewhere. But the only way to stop being lost is to come home, to sort of embrace who you are and embrace who you are in nature. So that's how I would explain the pagan worldview, is to embrace your own identity, embrace your roots, and embrace your loyalties that are given to you, that you are born with, that you don't choose, and that's the only way to fight nihilism and to get a meaningful life. So thank you very much for listening. Now, I don't really know how long I've been going on, but I'd like to have you ask me questions or comment upon what I said, so I can elaborate on anything that you might find interesting, or maybe what I said wasn't interesting at all. I don't know. Does anyone have anything to say? Any questions at all? Yes, sir.
I've read a little bit of Heidegger, and
right.
He's always talking about Dyson. You mentioned Dyson.
Yeah.
And the word means being. You mentioned being there.
Being there.
Or being. And I often wonder if that's also similar to identity, being. Because in English, a synonym for being is identity sometimes. And I'm an identitarian. So when I read Heidegger, I feel he'd be an identitarian by his very Dyson concept.
Yes, that's how I read his description of what Dasein is. It's a humans never just exist as abstract entities. It's like the modern world or modern liberalism expects us to be interchangeable, sort of economical factors, basically.
No identity.
No identity, and the point of being there is just to point out that when a human being exists, when a person exists, he always exists there. It doesn't just exist. He always exists there at a specific point with specific family relations, with specific. He never exists as an abstraction.
He's instantiated into.
Yeah. The point is that this is a rejection of humans as just abstractions, as just individuals that can be counted, atomized individuals that just exist, float around by themselves, because you always have roots, and that's the only thing that can make your life meaningful. And the idea of Dasein, the idea of being there, is just that when we exist, we are thrown into the world. We don't start as a blank slate of paper, and we're gonna write our life story on that blank piece of paper. Already when we start, there are things on the piece of paper. We have roots, we have family relations, we have a social situation, we have a tribal, an ethnic, a racial connection that we don't choose.
And then you're not a commodity.
You're not a commodity.
Be exchanged and replaced by people from other continents.
Exactly. I mean, that's the very thing that makes the modern mass migration horrible, because mass migration is built on rejecting your roots, on rejecting who you are, because you can just live anywhere, anyone can just live anywhere, because it's all about making money.
We're all exchangeable.
Yeah, everyone is exchangeable. It's like you're a commodity. You're like it's like if I let me give you this illustration, this example. If I lend you money, if I lend you $10, and when you give me the $10 back, I say, no, I want the very $10 I gave you. That would be completely unreasonable, because the whole point of money is to be interchangeable, is to be able to, you can use it as a symbol. So when I lend you money, I expect $10 back, not the very $10 bill that I gave you, right? But if I ask you to babysit my child for me, and you just give me any child back, well, I gave you one child, you give me one child back. That would be unreasonable, because, of course, the very purpose of a person, the very value in a person, the very value we see in a person is the relation we have to that person. That's why the notion of human equality is completely absurd. The notion of humans having equal value, that's completely absurd, because equal value for who? I mean, there is no person who regards everyone having equal value, because value is a function of the relationship you have to a certain person. And I usually sort of jokingly say to people who tell me that humans have the same value, I say, no, you don't believe that, because you don't believe that your children have the same value as Hitler, for example. Because there is no sort of abstract value in people. It's a particular value that is a function of your relation to them.
Not universalistic.
It's not universalistic at all. Universalism is the rejection of everything that is valuable in humans. So that's why universalism creates nihilism. It rejects everything we find valuable about life. And the thing that creates value in our life is our very roots. Does anyone else want to say something? Yes, in the back.
I just have a comment about the fact that you talked about the use of anti-implicit. Key point, and probably nobody speaks about that. I come from France,
Yes, thank you. Yeah, antidepressants. It's a symptom of obviously something being very wrong, because people don't they don't want to participate in life. They want to numb their minds, so they don't want to deal with reality, because reality gives them nothing. It's like people feel just completely alienated from the world, and so they just want to distract themselves. They find no purpose, and without roots and without a proper understanding of your history and who you are, you can have no purpose. I would say that psychological sort of ill health today would be very difficult to understand if you don't take that aspect into consideration. Anyone else want to say something? Yes, sir.
I'll give you an example about these antidepressants. For example, countries that are really, really poor, as well as India, South America, but they know their roots, their identity, and they don't need any depressants. They don't need these things to resolve these problems, because they have their own soul, their own blood, focus on their roots. And it's a very good example. You don't need to be poor to already be in a social problem to have to take antidepressants. And it's a problem with Europe. We are healthy, we have money, but although we need these things to
Yes.
fill the void.
Yeah, you can see that in if you compare suicide rates between countries, you'll see that the countries with the highest rates of suicide are often very well off economically. So it's something else that's lacking. It's not money. Anyone else want to say something? Yes?
On the part of Christianity, of course, I agree. I'm not Christian at all, and I agree that Christianity has interrupted and degraded many important European values. But on the other hand, I believe that we should add that Christianity has redirected and created some new ones. For example, the concept of chivalry, which is very similar, very comparable to the themoid element that you have just mentioned. It's very important not to ignore those parts. Like Christianity, of course it has caused trouble, but it's not the whole of it. There are some good elements, there are some elements that are very, very true, that stick true to the European psyche in general. That's what I believe.
Right, so when Christianity became established in Europe, in the Middle Ages, there's a writer called James Russell who wrote a book called the Germanization of Early Medieval Christianity. He talked about a double conversion, basically that people were converted to Christianity, but Christianity was also converted to them.
Exactly.
So it's like they had to change Christianity in order to get people to accept it, because people wouldn't. They had to rewrite basically the Bible stories into the what's called the Helion. Is it called the Helion? I don't remember. Yeah. As an early Bible to get the Germanic peoples to accept Christianity, because they just found it extremely alien to their mentality. So they had to convert Christianity as well. And so yes, my point is not to say that all Christian people are bad, or that people cannot be Christians if they want to, or find any sort of solace in that. I want to explain the point that the pattern of rejecting roots and starting with a new start and everything, and just rejecting the roots and thinking that you can have an abstract idea of the world and reject a particular concrete world, and you can just start from anew. First, you have started with the spiritual revolution, a new start in the spirit, and then a new start in politics, and a new start in culture, and finally a new start in biology. So now people have nothing. They have to make up their mind about who they are. I just want to point out that pattern started with Christianity, and obviously I didn't think of that myself. It's something that Nietzsche pointed out a long time ago, that liberalism and Marxism are just basically a continuation of the Christian value system without a supernatural God. It's just a continuation of the same values and so on. It's the same framework of that mindset, and I think we have to understand that. Yes. Anyone else? Anyone else? Yes.
First of all, thank you for your flawless deep speech. Really profound philosophical work. Thank you very much. And my thought, it resonates with your concluding statements about the essence of paganism as embracing your identity, your roots, right? Everything particular, everything valuable to us. And we'll indeed often hear that liberals say that how can you be proud of who you are? It's nothing to be proud of. You have to be proud of your achievements. And the way you are, it's again not your merit. But in fact, they of course misunderstand us. But the question is a little bit different, and it concerns the mechanism of possible changes. Often, Heaven worldview is considered to be a kind of natural conservative. We preserve our identity and we resist to multiculturalism, to globalist trends. But if you need to make a change, especially in those parts of the world where the situation is really helpless, do we have any kind of revolutionary strategy? Of course, we're different from Christians, as I mean this ideal type. I agree, of course, that we have to view Christianity organically, like Dominique Venner, for instance, did, and you perfectly commented on this issue. But they made a revolution, a spiritual revolution, as you also perfectly explained it, by making history from scratch, yes. So what will be our strategy? Do we have any kind of revolutionary approach, or maybe a combination of them, how to change things?
Yes, I want to point out that traditionalism, in the sense that I explained, is not opposed to progress. So progress is always based on building on what's already there, and the idea of starting from scratch is always dishonest, because you always have to accept some of the things that were already there, because or else you wouldn't make anything work. So it's like I said, it's a bit parasitical. It has to accept some aspects of what was there. So you can never start from new. The question was how we can make this
change, yes.
How we can make it. Yeah, I mean it's how can you make a paradigm shift, a revolution in the human mind? It's I've always seen armed movement or white nationalism, which is my political identity basically, as a religious movement rather than a political movement. In terms of perspectives, I don't see things in like a 4-year perspective as a political term of office or anything like that. I see it as a completely different perspective that might take many generations to get in place. The only way we can make it work is to lead by example. We have networks of our own. We have basically our own communities outside of the communities that are in place, and people will be attracted to them because they are more fulfilling to be a part of. What I explained and what I talked about is the very reason why I think we will attract people, because we are the only ones, nationalists are the only ones who can provide any sense of meaning to people's lives. And I think the great sort of disease in the modern world is a sense of nihilism and a sense of alienation. And I think that's what people want to get away from, and we are the only ones who can offer anything there. So I think that's why we will be able to create this revolution.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it sounds promising. It's not like a revolution brought by some desert religions, which again throws you out of emptiness into nothing. It's overcoming of alienation. So this is our goal indeed, and something we have to achieve, not only to promise, but to make it real, make it felt by people, right? Any other questions in the audience? Please.
Yes, just a quick question. Do you have any literature you would recommend, books or such? On the topic.
On the topic. Well, that's a difficult question. I don't know. The Genealogy of Morals by Nietzsche is a must read, I would say, to understand the modern world. Nietzsche was basically a cultural pathologist. He explained the roots of pathology, just like a medical pathologist explains the causes and functions of different diseases. Nietzsche was a person who explained the cultural diseases in the modern world and explained where they came from and their characteristics and so on, and he described them. And I think that's important. The things that give me the most are basically I'm obviously Scandinavian Nordic and just reading our oldest sort of texts, the Icelandic sagas and Snorri Sturluson and well, even the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer and so on, and the Metamorphoses of Ovid and the old texts that sort of that breathe a spirit that we don't have. That's what inspires me, and I think that's probably the most important thing. So that's what I would recommend. Anything else before we stop? Before I hand over the microphone to the other speaker.
Well, I'll throw in another quick question.
Okay.
So you're a fan of Heidegger?
I'm not a fan of Heidegger, no.
Well, your speech was on Heidegger.
No, it wasn't really on Heidegger. It's just that he has presented a concept that I find very useful. The concept of being thrown into the world, because it pinpoints what's wrong with the tabula rasa description of the world. It pinpoints what's completely wrong with the idea that we are born as blank sheets of paper, and we're going to sort of make up our minds about who we are going to be. So yeah, I don't read much Heidegger. I'm not a fan of Heidegger. No. It's just that he coined a concept that I find very useful. So that's why I gave him credit for it. I mentioned him. So it's nothing more than that, actually.
I've been reading lately some Frankfurt School, and Adorno and the Frankfurt School, they mention Heidegger a lot. He influenced a lot of their thinking. Heidegger.
Yeah, the Frankfurt School, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah,
they're not stupid. They definitely were onto something. They know how politics works. They know.
I think they do.
Yeah, and I think it's time for us to sort of wisen up on how politics works. Is that it? No one else? Okay. Well, thank you for listening to me.
Thank you again very much for your excellent speech, Fróði. We enjoyed your journey into the depth of being an identitarian from a pagan perspective. We can also, I think, sum up the message of your speech. And reference to Heidegger, in my opinion, is also very important. We know that this philosopher, he undertook his own attempt of making a kind of revolution in education system. In terms of national socialism, he was actually a rector at Freiburg University, yes. So he took this opportunity to change the education system, general cultural climate in Germany. Later he estimated his attempt as failed, but still he was decisive enough to take responsibility and try to change it. And in his opinion, it is also something which should start from the very foundations, how we perceive the world, how we distinguish between natural sciences and humanitarian sciences. The discussion was not started by Heidegger, but we heard already that for him it was everything was revolving around the concept of Dasein, especially early Heidegger, his project of fundamental ontology. So of course, this philosopher is extremely important and is fairly considered to be probably the most important philosopher of the 21st century. Leftists indeed also refer to him, and there are connections between Heidegger's disciple, for instance, Hadamard, and others. Discussions with Habermas, also well known. Of course, he influenced the entire spectrum of humanities. In my speech, I also often refer to him as he is one of the key thinkers who help us find this spiritual homeland I mentioned in the introduction to Fróði's speech. So this part of our today's conference, hedonism, mythology, counter-culture, was highlighted and disclosed perfectly well. And again, I would like to announce the switch. We will switch now to the second part of our conference cycle, which is called European Reconquista and Alliance between East and West. This part of our event will be disclosed by our another guest of honor, Hendrik Möbus, legendary person well known to you as well, frontman of Absurd, the band which will perform on stage as part of ASGARDSREI festival. While he was coming to our event, I already said a few words that it is extremely important that we can have him today at our event. Thank you, Hendrik, for coming, because we anticipated your new articles, new interviews, and of course public performances. It's something which we actually didn't expect, but it happened. And today we will listen to the lecture on quite a complicated but very important and inspiring topic. I mentioned it as well, Roman von Ungern-Sternberg, White God of War, the historical figure which is often viewed by some as a kind of avatar. Again, in the introduction to the conference, I told about the project of Reconquista, how it was born in the post-revolutionary Ukraine, and how it was supported by Western European nationalists, and first of all by Russian nationalists, paradoxically right, because it is a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But they found here this platform for the all-European reconquest, for the rebirth of the West, for a search for fruitful synthesis between East and West. So they found it here. And this White God of War, Mad Baron, Roman von Ungern-Sternberg, he also found it, not in Ukraine, but in his case it was actually an Asian country, Mongolia, but he is considered, as I said, this White God of War not incidentally, because of course it was a Western European phenomenon. It was like Alexander the Great, somebody who went eastwards and created this unique productive synthesis. This extraordinary figure, he found these spiritual vital forces in the East, and he used this source of power in his fight against the Bolsheviks. And his message, inspiring message, it went through generations and reached our generation. We can still feel this mystical power which surrounds his personality, and his really mad bravery, uniqueness of his personality in general. So this person, I'm not surprised that he is addressed by Hendrik Möbus. He will explain more about it, of course. But know that in the creativity of Absurd, there are some songs which refer to those icons of the third way, as we call it. I mean, Cornelia Codrano, there is a dedication song to this personality. It was mystical Christianity, but of course, first of all, it was their reawakening of these European archetypes, which we can also feel, sense, witness in the case of Roman von Ungern-Sternberg. So I invite to take the floor Hendrik Möbus and tell us, deliver a lecture on this extraordinary historical and meta-historical figure, Roman von Ungern-Sternberg, the White God of War.
Like Olena said, I'm going to talk about Baron Roman von Ungern-Sternberg. I think first time I came across him was some years ago. I read about him on internet, some pieces, and it was already very enchanting for me to read about this person, because he was like coming from some novel or fantasy tale or whatsoever. If you look at his life and everything, and then I started to get more into this topic, and I found out that even though he is known to us, but there's really not so much known about him that that we can have one full picture of everything that in his life and what he did and accomplished. And so when the idea for this conference came up, I was looking more into it and tried to research about him, but like I said, it's really hard to find good sources, but I did my best, and so now let me tell you about the Met Baron Roman von Ungern-Sternberg. I shall die a horrible death, but the world has never seen such a terror and such a sea of blood as it shall now see. With this dark prophecy, the so-called Met Baron said farewell to Ferdinand Ossendowski, a Polish expatriate fleeing from the Red Terror of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, who met Robert Nikolaus Maximilian Freiherr von Ungern-Sternberg, known as Baron von Ungern-Sternberg, in Urga, the capital of Mongolia, a few months before the Baron was betrayed by his own men, captured by the Red Army, tried as war criminal, and executed as one enemy to the people. Yes, the Baron was quite right in his last words to Ossendowski. His death was anything but glorious and heroic. He died at the hands of his sworn mortal enemy, the Bolsheviks and the Red Army, who seized power in Russia a few years earlier and ever since hunted the adversaries, the remaining monarchists and anti-Bolshevik white forces, deep into the dense woods of Siberia and faraway plains of Mongolia. It was the 15th of September, 1921, when Baron von Ungern-Sternberg was shot dead after a tribunal lasting for 7 hours. He died alone, far away from his ancestral home, and also removed from the kingdom that he ruled for a brief time, and where he was hailed as the war god incarnate. But for the Bolsheviks, he was just one of many renegade officers formerly serving in the army of Tsarist Russia, an insurgent taking up arms against the new powers that be, and attempting to roll back the communist, the Red Revolution in St. Petersburg and Moscow. He would no doubt be long forgotten by now, like so many other white officers fighting in vain against the Soviet Union. But he is not. Today, we still remember and talk about this extraordinary man and his brief yet epic life and struggle. Oswald Spengler, the herald of the decline of the West, mentioned the Baron in a speech he held in Würzburg 3 years after the death of Ungern-Sternberg. Around 1920, in Central Asia, there appeared as a Free Corps leader the Baron Ungern von Sternberg, who managed to gather, in a short period of time, an army of allegedly 150,000 men fiercely loyal to him, trained skillfully and willing to go wherever the Baron commanded them to be. This man was killed by the Bolsheviks not long after, but if he had succeeded, we couldn't tell what events would have unfolded in Asia and how the world map would have been reshaped today. Who was this mysterious man, once deemed more than fit to change the course of history and to reshape the world? In his death, we will find no answer to that. It is said that he refused to acknowledge the tribunal that sentenced him to death, because in his opinion, it was just as legitimate as the new powers that be in Moscow. He was accused to be the agent of hostile powers, funded and armed by foreign adversaries of the Bolsheviks for the sake of sabotaging the Red Revolution and stir unrest and civil war in the Far East. Hence he was believed to be the enemy of the ordinary Russian people, of the workers and peasants, a villain who wished to impose the yoke of aristocracy upon them once again. Already during his lifetime, the reality of his life and actions started to blur with the assumptions and anticipations of admirers and adversaries alike. It is surely true that the Baron was one descendant of age-old noble families from Hungary and Germany. But unlike so many others in his day and age, he wholeheartedly despised anything decadent, and he rather joined his low-ranking men at the front line instead of indulging in the worldly pleasures provided to his own social class. It is said that the lifestyle of the Baron, in particular when he was living in the Far East, resembled the ascetic exercises to be found in a monastery, and he equally imposed this stern discipline upon his own men as well. The families of Ungern and Sternberg are said to have participated in many historic conquests and crusades, until they settled in the Baltic territory, where some may have joined the Teutonic Knights Order and helped Christianize the pagan tribes from Lithuania and Estonia. From the Baltic, some family members started to sail the seas as merchants and privateers. Also, alchemists and mystics are said to have been among the Ungern-Sternberg family members, according to Baron von Ungern-Sternberg himself. Born on the 10th of January 1886 in Graz, a city located in the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Baron was soon moving with his mother and her new husband to the ancestral holdings in Estonia. Hermann Graf Kaiserling, the renowned German Baltic philosopher, used to live in the same neighborhood, and in his Voyage Through the Time, he recollects his earliest memories of the young Roman von Ungern-Sternberg, a distant relative of himself, whom he met when he was a teenager, portraying him as a predatory in appearance and character, with bright eyes reminding him of the sparrowhawk, a bird said to enjoy killing and mauling his prey. By all accounts, we are told that the young Baron was a wild and unruly child, rebelling against his teachers and not caring much for their attempts at educating him. According to Kaiserling, the Baron was not wont to contemplate anything, because in his view contemplation equals cowardice, and so he was not used to communicate his thoughts either. Quite to the contrary, the Baron was an intuitive genius, but with stark animalistic instincts. And this intrinsic character put him at odds with rules and regulations imposed on him by institutions like school or, as it turned out not long after, the military academy. As a boy, Ungern-Sternberg had an extreme pride in his ancient aristocratic family, but despite his German origin, he identified himself very strongly with the Russian Empire. After his stepfather secured a place at the Naval Academy in St. Petersburg for the young Baron, hoping in vain that there he could finally be disciplined, Ungern-Sternberg learned to appreciate the Russian national soul in all her unrestrained vastness and deep mysticism. At this time, he felt more at home among the Russians than to be back at the German Baltic estate of his family, where his mother died in 1907, thus making his grandmother the only remaining relative he cared about. Prior to his mother's death, he was expelled from the Naval Academy in 1995 after beating a superior officer. Without perspective, the Baron decided to join the Russian army as a private, serving in the Russian-Japanese War that lasted from 1994 until 1995, and ended with a sound defeat of the Russians at the hands of a superior Japanese military force. Also, the Baron came too late to the front lines for more than a few combat experience. He was promoted corporal until the war ended. He returned deeply impressed by the Far East and, in particular, by the military prowess of the Japanese army. After returning home in 1996, the Baron was admitted to the Pavlovsk Military College in St. Petersburg, where he joined the cavalry. It is said that during this time, he, who had already converted to Russian Orthodox Christianity at this point, encountered Buddhism for the first time and was introduced into occult studies as well. However, the Baron also told Ossendowski that one of his grandfathers, who sailed the Indian Ocean, looting British cargo, became a Buddhist and introduced Ungern-Sternberg in this religion. Be that as it may, he graduated from the military college and asked to be transferred to a Cossack cavalry regiment in Siberia, where he served as an officer in the 1st Augunsky and then in the 1st Amursky Cossack regiments. where he got used to the lifestyle of nomadic people, such as the Mongolians and the Buryats. Ungern-Sternberg had specifically asked to be stationed with a Cossack regiment in Asia, as he felt drawn to the Asian people and wished to learn more. But still, his irritability and flaring temper caused him problems once more. At one point, he brawled with a fellow officer, but almost got him court-martialed this time. It was probably his kinsman, the General von Reconquista, who helped to avert the worst for Ungern-Sternberg. However, at the same time, he became an excellent horseman, earning the respect of the Mongolians and the Buryats due to his skill at riding and fighting from a horse, being equally adept at using both a gun and a sword. In 1913, at his request, he was transferred to the reserves. Ungern-Sternberg traveled to Outer Mongolia with a plan to assist the Mongolians in their struggle for independence from China. But the Russian officials declined his request to join the garrison of the Russian consulate there. He later arrived in the town of Kyiv in Western Mongolia, where he served as an out-of-staff officer at the Russian consulate. Because he didn't have much else to do, he used his time by learning the Mongolian language and customs. That is the official story of his travels there, but Kazerling tells us of Ungern-Sternberg's adventures in the Far East. For months, he lived as a hermit having visions, until he was possessed by a wild lust for plunder and pillage. Then he looted monasteries, probably killing the monks too. When his possession faded off, he became a dreamer once more, and as a dreamer he accomplished much of what he did. Even if he looted, if he killed or performed heroic deeds all on his own. In early 1914, Baron von Ungern-Sternberg left Mongolia and returned to his ancestral home in Estonia. On the 19th of July 1914, Ungern-Sternberg was back at active duty in the outbreak of World War I. He took part in the Russian offensive in East Prussia and was fighting in Poland and Galicia until 1916, when he also participated in rearguard action raids on German troops and was injured 4 times. Throughout the war on the Eastern Front, he gained a reputation as an extremely brave, but somewhat reckless and mentally unstable officer, a man with no fear of death, who seemed most happy leading cavalry charges or being in the thick of combat. He was decorated with several military awards during his time in active combat, but despite his many awards, he was eventually discharged from one of his commandant positions for attacking the adjutant of the Russian governor of Chernihiv in a brawl in October 1916, an incident for which he was detained for 2 months. After his release from military prison in January 1917, Ungern-Sternberg was again transferred to the reserve and sent to Vladivostok, just to be fighting in the Caucasian theater of the conflict not long after, where Russia was confronting the Ottoman Empire. The February Revolution that ended the rule of the House of Romanov was an extremely bitter blow to the monarchist Ungern-Sternberg, who saw the revolution as the beginning of the end of Russia that he knew. In the Caucasus, Ungern-Sternberg met again Cossack captain Grigory Mikhailovich Semyonov, whom he already knew from his time in Poland. The friendship of Semyonov and Ungern-Sternberg would soon become decisive for the future of the latter. Together they started to organize a volunteer military unit composed of local Assyrian Christians, but then Semyonov departed for Siberia in March 1917, joined by Ungern-Sternberg, and the Kerensky government officially approved their plans to raise a regiment among the local Buryat population for the war in Europe. However, the Bolshevik-led October Revolution of 1917 would soon see Russia depart from the Western theater of war and turn to civil war hostilities instead. Semyonov and Ungern-Sternberg declared their allegiance to the Romanovs and vowed to fight the revolutions In late 1917, Ungern-Sternberg, acting on orders from Semyonov, and a small Cossack detachment crossed the border on a train, and they peacefully disarmed the 1,500 men-strong Russian garrison of Manchuria in Manchuria, who had rebelled against the officers. The soldiers were put on a train and sent to the west. For a time, the occupied railway station of Manchuria served as stronghold of Semyonov and Ungern-Sternberg, and their preparations for war in Transbaikalia, a region of strategic importance for all war parties. They started to enroll volunteers in a special Manchurian regiment, which became a nucleus for anti-communist forces led by Semyonov. Ungern-Sternberg and his local brilliant fighters would soon proceed to disarm the Russian troops in Manchuria, but the Chinese became increasingly afraid of his rising power, and they captured him and his men eventually. In response, Semyonov sent an armored train into Chinese territory, and soon Ungern-Sternberg was released at last. From March to July 1918, the Special Manchurian Regiment repeatedly attempted to seize and occupy Russian territory along the border with Manchuria, but they were soundly defeated on July 13th and had to retreat deep into Manchurian territory. However, when Japanese troops and weapons arrived in August 1918, Semyonov and Ungern-Sternberg were back on the offensive, and this time they managed to conquer all of Transbaikalia, where Semyonov in Chita declared himself ataman. He promoted Ungern-Sternberg to the rank of Major General and appointed him with guarding the strategically important railway station at Dauria, southeast of Lake Baikal. It was here when Ungern-Sternberg started to act independently and as a commander in his own right. He kept enrolling new troops under his command, forming the Asiatic Cavalry Division, but at the same time his regime over Dauria became more severe and violent. Nearby villages as well as trains in transit were terrorized, with Ungern-Sternberg's wrath directed at anyone non-Russian, but at Jews in particular. He blamed the Jews for the Bolshevik Revolution and the murder of the royal family. Hence, Jews were ushered off the trains and executed at once. His hatred for Jews went so far that he is said to have contemplated genocide among them once the Bolsheviks were defeated and all of Russia liberated by the armies of the White Counter-Revolution. Also, the tensions between Semyonov and Ungern-Sternberg kept increasing, because the latter complained about the corruption, squanormania, and philo-Semitism of the former. Ungern-Sternberg was awarded the St. Georg's Cross First Class and promoted to Lieutenant General in March 1990. Baron von Ungern-Sternberg was taking care of the dirty work Semyonov would rather not take responsibility for. For instance, captured soldiers of the Red Army were transferred to Dauria, where Ungern-Sternberg had them summarily executed. The Asiatic Cavalry Division was quite a motley crew, which included Russians, Buryats, Tatars, Bashkirs, Mongolians, Chinese, Japanese, Polish exiles, and many others. This division likely resembled a band of medieval Landsknechte, mercenaries, and without unconditional loyalty to their commander, Baron von Ungern-Sternberg, and the discipline he enforced on his troops, it is hard to imagine how else they had fought together instead of fighting one another. The Baron reinforced the train station at Dauria, turning it into a fortress from which his troops launched attacks on Red Army forces. During 1920, the military situation for the White Counter-Revolutions became increasingly difficult. Admiral Kulchur, the internationally recognized leader of the anti-Bolshevik forces fighting in Russia, was defeated and ultimately murdered by the Bolsheviks. Also, General Wrangel was forced to retreat from Crimea, and that left Transbaikalia to be the only Russian territory still under control of White troops. Ungern-Sternberg anticipated the coming offensive of the Red Army, and he started looking for a place where he and his men could find a new safe haven for their operations against the Bolsheviks. Already in 1919, taking advantage of the weakness of Russia's government caused by revolution and civil war, the nationalist Chinese government sent troops to end the autonomy of Outer Mongolia and rejoined it with China. This violated the terms of a tripartite Russian-Mongolian-Chinese agreement signed in 1950, which secured the autonomy of Outer Mongolia under the rule of the Pact Khan, who was a spiritual as well as political leader of Mongolian Buddhism. When the Chinese returned in 1919, he was removed from power and put under house arrest. The Pact Khan sent a letter to Baron von Ungern-Sternberg, urgently asking for help against the Chinese occupation. Ungern-Sternberg complied with this request, and he and his soldiers, said to have numbered no more than 1,500 men, crossed into Mongolia in an attempt to drive the Chinese out of there. After first attempts failed, Baron von Ungern-Sternberg decided to wait through the winter before he marched on the capital of Mongolia, Urga, where the Chinese had deployed 7,000 men with artillery and machine guns in fortified positions. The local Mongolians started to aid Ungern-Sternberg and his men with food, horses, new recruits and more weapons. The Pact Khan sent his blessings and prophesied a victory over the Chinese in the coming spring. Baron von Ungern-Sternberg asked Mongolian astrologers and seers to counsel him in his decisions, and the Mongolians supported him all the more because they understood his earnest desire to become their liberator and protector. It was also 1920 when Baron von Ungern-Sternberg revoked his former allegiance to Semyonov, who was eventually defeated by the Red Army and forced into exile, because he wanted to pursue political ambitions far exceeding the agenda of the violent counter-revolution in Russia. Ungern-Sternberg wished to reinstate and strengthen monarchy everywhere, starting in Asia, where he dreamed of a great empire akin to the one ruled by Genghis Khan, but also Russia and all of Europe too. He fervently believed in the divine right of kings and emperors, whom he considered a bulwark against the decline of civilization. The Jews, on the other hand, were to him the root of all unrest, anarchy and civil war that he witnessed in Russia and elsewhere. Woe to any Jew who found himself in the dominion of Baron von Ungern-Sternberg. Basically all the Jews in Mongolia, with only a few exceptions, were killed after Urga fell to the Asiatic Cavalry Division. On January 31st, 1921, Baron von Ungern-Sternberg ordered the assault on Urga. Despite heavy losses and initial setbacks, his troops eventually defeated the Chinese occupation forces and drove them out of the city. The Pact Khan was rescued from his house arrest, and the capital city was finally taken on the 4th of February. After the battle, Ungern-Sternberg's troops began plundering Chinese stores and killing Russian Jews who were living in Urga. But a few days later, he ended the looting and enforced discipline among his soldiers once again. The Chinese were not yet expelled from Mongolia, so a string of subsequent battles outside of the capital had the remaining Chinese troops retreat to northern Mongolia, from where they hoped to reach China by rounding the Mongolian capital to the west. However, they were soon overtaken by the Russian and Mongolian pursuers, and after a final battle ranging from March 30th until April 2nd, the Chinese were routed and chased across the southern border of the country. Soon Mongolia was liberated from Chinese occupation once again. Already on March 13th, Mongolia was declared an independent monarchy with the Pact Khan as head of the state. The Pact Khan identified Baron von Ungern-Sternberg as incarnation of the Baek-Se, the Lord of War and in origin a pre-Buddhist war god of the Mongols. When the Pact Khan was crowned as Khan of Mongolia, he made Ungern-Sternberg a Khan too. The Pact Khan presented Ungern-Sternberg with a ring depicting a swastika, a treasure that was believed to have been passed down all the way from Genghis Khan himself. Furthermore, the Baron was promoted to the rank of general. Ever since this day, he would be dressed in the yellow coat of Mongolian princes. It was a dream come true. In effect, Baron von Ungern-Sternberg became the dictator of Mongolia for a short period of time. Even so, his regime was ruling with terror and intimidation once more. Ungern-Sternberg also attempted to modernize Orga by imposing street cleaning and sanitation, promoting religious life and tolerance in the capital, introducing a national currency, and attempting to reform the economy of the Mongolian kingdom. In spring 1921, Baron von Ungern-Sternberg crossed back into Russia and raided several Red Army outposts. But during his absence from the capital, Red Army detachments, together with the Mongolian People's Army, captured Orga and ended the rule of the Balkan in favor of a secular pro-communist regime. Also, he made additional territorial gains in his crusade up north. His hope to get help from his former ally Semyonov and the Japanese government turned out to be in vain. When the Red Army sent large forces to counter his offensive, Ungern-Sternberg decided to retreat to Mongolia. But many of his formerly loyal soldiers wished to escape to Manchuria and put an end to the fighting, which they considered a hopeless cause by now. The Baron vowed to keep fighting, and he hoped to make it all the way to Tibet, from where he wanted to realize his vision of a pan-Asiatic empire at long last. His troops, however, mutinied and tried to assassinate him. With nowhere to go, Baron von Ungern-Sternberg was hunted down by the Red Army and ultimately betrayed by a Mongolian prince who turned him over to his pursuers on August 21, 1921. Some sources say that he was offered amnesty if he joined the Red Army, but he refused to betray his ideals, and before he was shot dead in the prison yard of Novosibirsk, he managed to swallow the St. Georg's cross so it could not be defiled by his enemies' hands. His swastika ring, however, was taken from him and is rumored to have ended up in the possession of the legendary Red Army Marshal Zhukov in 1936. The life of Baron von Ungern-Sternberg lasted not much longer than 35 years, but it is nothing short of extraordinary, to say the least, and there is so much more to it than what meets the eye. According to Ferdinand Ossendowski, Roman von Ungern-Sternberg once told him, "My name is surrounded with such hate and fear that no one can judge what is truth and what is false, what is history and what myth." Hermann Graf Kaiserling believed that for the most part of his life, Roman von Ungern-Sternberg was a severely divided personality, who could either be holy or be cruel or be both in the starkest expression, but who would be unable to reconcile the tension caused by opposing forces in one and the same personality. Roman von Ungern-Sternberg's biological father is said to have been committed to a mental asylum once, and to some observers this would explain that he too was mentally unstable. But by all accounts, no hard evidence of any hereditary madness could ever be found in the family history of the Ungern-Sternberg. Roman von Ungern-Sternberg surely was called the Mad Baron, or Bloody Baron, for the violence and bloodshed he has inflicted upon others, with torturing those suspected to be Red spies, as well as executing even his own soldiers for the slightest offense. However, the instances of arbitrary killings and mass murder in the Russian Civil War can hardly be deemed exclusive to Baron von Ungern-Sternberg, so there must be something else but violence and murder that set him apart from any other warlord on either side of the battlefield, something out of the ordinary that prompted many of his contemporaries to deem him insane. When Baron von Ungern-Sternberg joined the Russian army on the eve of World War I, he was one of many from among the ranks of German Baltic aristocracy who pledged alliance to the Russian Tsar and had no qualms fighting their German kinsmen with whom they shared language, culture, and bloodline. It was still the age of empires, where the notion of nationality was yet to be conceived, and shifting loyalty determined by the allegiance to one crown or the other was anything but uncommon among the nobles. Baron von Ungern-Sternberg, however, would refuse to turn his back on the Russian Tsar even after his whole family was slain by the Bolsheviks. A monarchy, for all practical purposes, was dead in Russia and Europe too. Not so for Ungern-Sternberg. He became obsessed with monarchy. to the point that this idea would set him at odds with every other leader of the white counter-revolution, who would see no point in returning to a state quo ante before royal rulers were replaced by national governments pretty much everywhere in Europe and Asia, like it already happened in February 1917 when the Tsar abdicated, the Romanov dynastic rule in Russia ended and was replaced by the newly formed Russian provisional government. Contrary to the spirit of the time, the zeitgeist, Baron von Ungern-Sternberg considered monarchy to be the only legitimate form of government for any people. Needless to say, but out there in the Far East he was all alone with the sentiment. In Russia, the Bolsheviks had murdered the Romanov royal family, and in China, already in 1912, the rule of the Qing dynasty was ended by revolution and a nationalist government took over. Only in Mongolia, of all places, the monarchist agenda of Baron von Ungern-Sternberg could align with the political aspirations of a local ruler. The Bog Khan, also known as the living Buddha. He was the third most important person in the Tibetan Buddhist hierarchy, below only the Dalai Lama and Panchen Lama. Hermann Graf Kaiserling mentions that Roman von Ungern-Sternberg was very curious from his teenage years onward with Tibetan and Hindu philosophy, and often spoke of the mystical powers possessed by geometrical symbols. Also, we have no record showing when the Baron actually converted to Buddhism, notwithstanding that Ferdinand Ossendowski said of Ungern-Sternberg that he became a Buddhist in childhood. His long-lasting fascination for this religion cannot be denied. He lived in Mongolia prior to World War I, he spoke Mongolian, he dressed in traditional Mongolian clothes, and he stayed in touch with local dignitaries after his departure. Hence, the Bog Khan could be certain that Roman von Ungern-Sternberg would be receptive to his plea for help when he asked for his assistance to overthrow the Chinese occupation of Outer Mongolia. When Ungern-Sternberg left Russia to aid the Mongolians in their struggle for independence, for all practical purposes, he turned his back on the white counter-revolution in Russia. After 1920, Baron von Ungern-Sternberg became a warlord of his own, accountable to no one but himself and his God. In this he reminds of the conquerors and conquistadors from times of yore, which sailed forth into a new world to make a name for their own, to find fabled treasures, discover ancient cultures, meet a sudden death, and become immortal legends thereafter. Baron von Ungern-Sternberg was a brave man, for all we know, even daring to the point of tempting and defying death. From his early time as a soldier and officer, whether in the Far East or later in Galicia and Poland, he could be found in the heat of the battle or volunteering for dangerous missions that took him behind enemy lines. When he commandeered his own troops in Transbaikalia, Ungern-Sternberg used to lead by example. He would ride and fight with his soldiers, share their meals, and sleep together with them under the same roof. Unlike other white officers, like Semyonov for instance, Ungern-Sternberg practices an ascetic lifestyle that would even have him avoid drinking alcohol any longer. He is said to have been a heavy drinker once, a habit that apparently contributed to his lack of discipline, which caused him so many troubles in his early years as a student and soldier. With his stern attitude, the Baron was feared as well as revered by his soldiers, who knew that any misbehavior on their part would carry heavy-handed penalties, but loyalty and bravery would be rewarded likewise. It was his liberation of Roga, the capital of Mongolia, against all odds, that echoed in Western newspapers and made many aware of his name for the first time ever. How he was able to expel the Chinese occupation force from Mongolia, even so badly outnumbered and outgunned, certainly deserves the respect from any military strategist. Needless to say, but the reports from Mongolia became all the more exaggerated and twisted the farther they traveled. Hence the legend of the Mad Baron, who ruled with iron fist in an exotic and remote kingdom, could easily seize the imagination and fantasy of a Western audience receptive to tales from faraway places and daring adventurers. Kaiserling called Ungern-Sternberg one of the most metaphysically and occultly gifted men I have ever met, and believed that the Baron was a clairvoyant who could read the minds of the people around him. We know from the travel report of Ferdinand Ossendowski that the gaze of Baron von Ungern-Sternberg was very unsettling, to say the least. When they met for the first time, Ossendowski recalls, his eyes were fixed over me like those of an animal from a cave. Ossendowski witnessed how a bunch of prisoners were brought to Ungern-Sternberg, who would stare at them for a long time, until he finally proclaimed who, from among them, must be commissars of the Communist Party. And as it turned out, documents proving their espionage activities were found on the two prisoners he had singled out. They were beaten to death on his command. That Baron von Ungern-Sternberg is believed to have been the incarnation of a pre-Buddhist god of war, recognized by the local spiritual leader as a descendant of the fabled Genghis Khan, and Zeus, being one of the last Khans of Mongolia himself, quite certainly must be considered the most intriguing aspect to his legend. This was a moment when Baron von Ungern-Sternberg became immortal in his lifetime already. He was prophesied by Mongolian seers that he would have 133 days more to live, as he told Ossendowski when they met in Urga. He expected to die, not as the victor, but as the vanquished. Yet he feared not. He knew that his death was meant to be the ultimate sacrifice from which the muse, transcending the ages, would blossom and rise forth. Only the muse can conquer death, and hence his death, as gloomy as it was, could only add to the legend of his life. Betrayed by the last of his men, captured by his mortal enemy, but remaining defiant until the very end, not surrendering ever, and never once asking for mercy or begging for his life. He died the same way that he lived, as a true enemy to the world that he hated and wished to tear asunder. So his vision of a new world could ultimately manifest in reality. When the bullets of the Red Army firing squad hit him, he truly lived up to the words of Ernest Hemingway. But man is not made for defeat. A man can be destroyed, but not defeated. The life journey of Baron von Ungern-Sternberg took him all the way from the Baltic Sea to Outer Mongolia, from Lutheran Protestantism via Russian Orthodoxy to Mongolian Buddhism, from being a soldier to becoming a war god. It is surely noteworthy that the Baron moved from a religion that only knows a rather abstract concept of a god who doesn't reveal himself to men, via a religion that knows many saints touched and blessed by God, towards a religion where men can become one with the Godhead. The closer he came to Mongolia, the closer he came to embrace the numinous. In light of Heidegger's contemplation of religion and metaphysics, of which we read in his contributions to philosophy, for instance, it does not come as a surprise that Baron von Ungern-Sternberg could never have accomplished his magnum opus if he had stayed put in the West. Nietzsche proclaimed the death of God, in Europe at least, and Heidegger agreed. Where God is dead, he is absent. The notion of the absent God means that there is no God visible for men. There is nothing that gathers men and things together. The world has become groundless. No trace is left of the holy, explains Heidegger in his Say, What Are Poets For? Confined to the West, a man like Baron von Ungern-Sternberg would have remained forlorn in a world without God. Also, Julius Evola explains why the Baron turned to the East, because the East was faithful to their own spiritual traditions and willing to stand together with those who were able to revolt against the modern world. Ungern-Sternberg turned his back on the nihilism he experienced in the West, and he started to seek epiphany in the East. We can barely imagine the agony he must have felt when the Bolshevik Revolution started to tear his beloved Russia apart, manifesting all the horror of spiritual degradation he lost so much. Just like Ungern-Sternberg himself, so was Ferdinand Ossendowski an eyewitness to the Bolshevik Revolution and her aftermath in Russia. In his book, The Shadow of the Gloomy East, he describes how madness and murder in the name of revolution have flung the gates of hell wide open. This hell of our making did not come as a surprise to Ossendowski, so He knew that in Russia, no one but the ruling upper class was educated and civilized in the image of Western culture, whereas the vast majority of spiritually illiterate masses was inclined to dark and gloomy mysticism, which took crude, primitive, un-Christian and anti-civilized forms. Where else but here could the Antichrist have manifested in our world, he wondered. Already he has dispatched his servants to ruin and break up the richest of our countries and nations, Russia and the Russians. The people are bending beneath its horrors, for also men may still feel capable of fighting men. They cannot reasonably fight against the power of evil. There was but one man willing to take up arms and fight against the evil of his time, Baron Roman von Ungern-Sternberg. Ossendowski also reveals to us some amazing insights that help to shed light on the religious doctrine upheld by Ungern-Sternberg in his final days. Even so, it is hard to determine how much of it we can take for granted. According to his own account, Buddhism was introduced into his family by his grandfather, who is said to have been a privateer in the Indian Ocean. Ungern-Sternberg spoke to Ossendowski about the war between the good and evil spirits, by which he meant his relentless war efforts fighting against the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Revolution is an infectious disease that does blot out culture, kill morality, and destroy all the people. Religion, on the other hand, guides humanity upward toward higher ideals, and thus Baron von Ungern-Sternberg apparently believed in a dichotomy of religion and revolution, of spirituality and materialism, the latter removing man further from the divine and the spiritual. From his point of view, the revolution in Russia was that one grave cataclysm spoken about in the holy scriptures of Christianity and Buddhism alike. It appeared, turned back the wheel of progress and blocked our way to divinity. Ungern-Sternberg is being quoted. He considered the whole of Russia and Europe in imminent danger, because the day of divine reckoning would now be inevitable. Famine, destruction, the death of culture, of glory, of honor, and of spirit, the death of states, and the death of people. He already could see the stark mad destruction of humanity. If we consider this to be true, then Baron von Ungern-Sternberg was an apocalypticist more than anything else. He was motivated by the notion that he is living through the end times, already witnessing the end of the world, and it is up to him to save mankind from the ultimate undoing. Apocalypticism, or eschatology, is integral to any major religion in the world. In Christianity, we are familiar with the revelation of St. John the Divine that tells us of the rise of Satan, laying waste to the world until he is ultimately defeated in the second coming of Christ. Fundamental to eschatology is a belief in the cyclic nature of history. History is divided into ages, and each age lasts for a certain period of time. The transition from one age to the next is believed to reshape the reality of the world as we know it, altering our way of living, thinking, and being. Usually it is a major crisis like a global conflict or war, which marks the end of one age and ushers men into a new reality. Buddhism too does have a tradition of eschatology, because Buddha himself predicted that his teachings would disappear 5,000 years after his passing, when mankind would degenerate in a period of greed, lust, violence, impiety, sexual depravity, and physical weakness, all culminating in the collapse of society that would erase the memory of Buddha. However, there will be a new era in which the next Buddha, Maitreya, will appear. He is said to be fully awakened, abounding in wisdom and goodness, happy with knowledge of the world, unsurpassed as a guide to mortals, willing to be led, a teacher for gods and men, an exalted one. Every apocalypse knows a savior, a messiah who will lead the faithful from the darkness into the light of the new dawn. Theosophy, the esoteric doctrine said to have inspired the German Thule Society, among others, teaches that Maitreya previously incarnated as Krishna, of whom we read in the ancient Vedic text of Bhagavad Gita, a mythological figure imprinting itself on the Buddhism of one Baron von Ungern-Sternberg too. It is sometimes suggested that Baron von Ungern-Sternberg was interested in theosophy, and also we cannot confirm as much with certainty. It is still obvious by his own words that he was no stranger to the concept of a messianic figure appearing in the end times either. In his farewell speech to Ossendowski, he explicitly mentions the king of the world, who shall rise from his subterranean capital, Shambhala, at the end of time. Much has been said and made of Baron von Ungern-Sternberg's cruelty, because he inflicted several punishments upon his own soldiers for the slighted transgressions. He would indiscriminately kill Jews and communists, and he took no prisoners when he defeated the enemy on the battlefield. Also, allegedly, he was insane, a bloody mad baron, but it is far more likely that he just appeared to be out of his mind to any but the most insightful observer. In the West, it is widely presumed that Buddhism is a pacifist and non-violent creed. Everyone is familiar with the image of the praying Tibetan monks who appear to be so detached from mundaneness that they couldn't care less for the primal inclinations, making man to be the wolf of his fellow man. How could Baron von Ungern-Sternberg have been Buddhist if he was so prone to violence? But if he was a Buddhist who inflicted pain and suffering on others, does this coincidence not show his confusion? Western perception of Buddhism more often than not is flawed and ignorant of the different theological lineage that have Buddhism, like any other of the major religions, split up into various local distinctions. The Mongolian culture was, and remains to be, a nomadic one, and like any other nomadic tribe, men were warriors first and foremost. Under the rule of Genghis Khan and his successors, the Tibetan Buddhism of the Sakya school became the de facto state religion of the Mongolian Empire. The Sakya school is heavily influenced by tantric doctrines from India. Tantra denotes the esoteric traditions to be found in Buddhism and Hinduism alike. And it is from this angle that Baron von Ungern-Sternberg's personal approach to Buddhism becomes so much more plausible. One of the most important Vedic texts of Hinduism is the Bhagavad Gita. It tells of a battle where the warrior Arjuna feels defeated and unmotivated to fight because his enemies are his family. So either way he feels he will lose, either he will die or he must kill his family. In this moment appears Krishna, as personification of the Godhead, and he tells Arjuna that all these warriors are already dead, for they are all subject to the laws of time, whereas the self is eternal and free from this delusion. Krishna tells Arjuna to fight, either win and conquer the earth or lose and attain heaven. But either way, one must not hesitate to fight. Indecision is caused by selfish desires, which Krishna stress are hidden within. But by performing service for the world, one can act with the benefit of all creatures, thereby imitating the divine act. The American occultist Joseph Carey calls this the quaternary thought. In his essay, The Second Coming of Q, he writes about it as the full humanist awareness of the spiritual unity of friend and foe, and even, in Buddhist terms, of all sentient beings. But it is able to attain a negation of this on a higher level, a greater enlightenment, which does not deny oneness but subsumes it in order to carry on the necessary work of the universe. This is called in Sanskrit Dharma. It carries the implications of duty in the highest spiritual sense and of destiny. It is now safe to say that Ungern-Sternberg did embody the essence of the quaternary thought as it was originally formulated in the ancient Ayurvedic culture, and can still be found in the Bhagavad Gita. He was not motivated by primal urges. He was not bloodthirsty and cruel for the sake of inflicting suffering upon others, but he felt compelled to do what he deemed absolutely necessary to do in face of the spiritual darkness that he witnessed engulfing Russia and Europe alike. He aligned himself with the divine. He has become one with Godhead, from whom all things come and who is in awe, as it is said in the Bhagavad Gita. In every specific situation, there is a specific work to be done. The Dharma indeed, the work of the will of God, Joseph Carey tells us in his essay. Like the ancient noble warlord Arjuna, of whom we read in the Bhagavad Gita, Baron von Ungern-Sternberg understood that he too has to carry out the will of God, even if it means to kill relentlessly and without mercy, because it is just like Krishna told Arjuna on the eve of his battle against his own kin. I am all-powerful time, which destroys all things, and I have come here to slay these men. Even if Su does not fight, all the warriors facing thee shall die. In this regard, it is also interesting how Hermann Graf Kaiserling was reflecting on the transmutation of Baron von Ungern-Sternberg after he liberated Mongolia and was welcomed by the Mongolians as one of their own. Whereas Ungern-Sternberg seemed to oscillate between holiness and bloodlust hitherto, as Kaiserling observed, making him appear like a completely different person depending on his prevailing mood, it was only there and then that he reconciled his conflicting soul and was made whole, to be more than the sum of all his apparently antagonistic personality traits. Kaiserling attributes this to the particular atmosphere of Mongolia. They translated Ungern-Sternberg's holiness and bloodlust into a dynamic equilibrium, thus enabling him to commit the vilest atrocity in a mental state of decency and purity. He probably wanted to purge the inferior mankind and felt good with that, Kaiserling tells us. However, he didn't want to torment any individual man for his own sake. If he let someone be beaten to death or be burned alive, he likely felt just like Jehovah, who scourged the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by fire and brimstone. Last but not least, it is noteworthy that Baron von Ungern-Sternberg wished, in his own words to Ossendowski, to found an order of military Buddhists in Russia for the protection of the process of evolution for humanity and for the struggle against revolution, because he was certain that evolution leads to divinity and revolution to bestiality. He said he introduced the condition of celibacy, the entire negation of women, of the comforts of life, of superfluities, according to the teachings of Buddhism. On the other hand, he said he also allowed the limitless use of alcohol, hashish, and opium in his Buddhist order, substances known for inducing Dionysian rapture and shamanic trance. We are reminded of the Teutonic Knights order that ruled the Baltic when Ungern-Sternberg's ancestors settled there, a Germanic offspring of the ill-fated Templars' Knight order, in which monastic life went hand in hand with battle prowess and initiation into the arcane by means of a secret rite of passage no outsider should ever know about. And it is remarkable that Baron von Ungern-Sternberg wished to emulate this ideal of European saintly knighthood under the auspices of militant Buddhism. However, it makes perfect sense in light of the utmost fanaticism that Ungern-Sternberg knew would be required for banishing the spiritual darkness suffocating the enlightenment of the West. His cruelty appeared arbitrary and shocking even to the contemporaries who were used to human suffering, but was it not a cathartic rite of passage that would strip him and his disciples of all too human weakness and fallacy? Is it not required to relinquish humanity when you approach the numinous? All priesthood, all saints and seers who commune with the gods have sacrificed some or other worldly attachment. But unless you sacrifice your compassion for fellow men for the sake of your love of men, you cannot truly embrace the numinous and transcend beyond good and evil. But it is there, at this distant point so far removed from our humanity, where the Hyperborean, the Übermensch, appears. He is the last to make a final stand in our dark age, and the first to behold the new dawn of a golden age reborn. Baron von Ungern-Sternberg traveled a long way from the center of Europe into the heartland of Asia. He was crossing as well as burning all the bridges between the West and the East for the sake of forging their union. And he turned into the white god of war who swept across Central Asia like a bloody storm of avenging karma, as Ossendowski had observed in Aue. In the Far East, the Baron von Ungern-Sternberg met his fate and fulfilled his destiny. But his eyes were firmly set on the western horizon, from where he once emerged and wished to return one day, as a soldier as well as a saint, to be a scourge as much as a savior. The decline of the West is a reality now more than ever, but after 2 devastating world wars, it is not there on the old continent where we can find once more the strength to turn the tide and carry on with the Reconquista started by the mad bloody baron. In the West, we find all the ancient wisdom and ancestral knowledge that would no doubt help to guide us on our path upwards to divinity, but it is in the East where we find the untamed power and untainted virtue required to cleanse our path of all the degeneration, debris and decay that blocks the way of our sacred evolution as the Hyperboreans to be. Like Baron von Ungern-Sternberg turned to the East to find strength in his crusade against communism in the West, we too must turn eastward to find new strength in our own crusade against cultural Marxism and Europe and North America too. Let the Reconquista begin here and now, my dear friends and fellow comrades. Today is the East and tomorrow is the West. Thank you.
Thank you for your fundamental work, Hendrik. We are really blown away, and I would say that your report can be qualified as an academic one, but also it really conveys this mysticism surrounding Baron's personality, which I mentioned before, because it's really hard now to return to this space and time. But again, thank you for highlighting so many aspects of his personality, life, and myth of Ungern-Sternberg. It's really hard to enumerate all of these aspects. This apocalyptic figure, this punishment of God, similar to Genghis Khan or Attila, this person who at the same time, as we found out from your speech, also conducted some kind of reforms in Mongolia, the person who synthesized East and West, developed, revived Eastern European chivalry on a Asian basis or under the auspices of Buddhist religion, the person who endowed Buddhism with this unusual militant sense, and again an avatar, a god, a deity, something luminous. So indeed a lot of things to think over after this speech. I think all of us feel it here. So while you coming back to reality and prepare questions, maybe I will ask the first one, because in my opinion this similarity between Baron's personality and your, I would say, personal or metaphysical aspirations, which we can reconstruct from the text and speeches and musical creativity, we can really trace the similarities. So what does Baron von Ungern-Sternberg mean personally for you, and why did you choose this topic here?
Yes, like I mentioned before my speech, I came across him some years ago, and he was just really speaking to me on a personal level, because in a way you can just say in a nutshell his life was a triumph of the will. He really was setting his mind to accomplish something that only he himself believed in, at least at some point, and he managed to convince others to join him, and to actually, even though it was only for a few months, but he actually accomplished to turn this into reality, something that nobody would have believed possible, that some officer from Russia can come to Mongolia and actually expel the Chinese and be recognized as the last Khan of Mongolia and a war god actually. So this was really on a personal level very appealing to me, because me too, I believe in this triumph of the will, that actually you have to force your will on the reality around you to manifest a vision and to make things possible, to make something come true, and not let anything decide what can be or what cannot be. But it's up to you to actually say this must be, and I want to make it happen. Yes, that's my personal link to him. Yes.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I understood the answer. You put it clear that indeed Baron can be a symbol, a source of inspiration for a cultural revolution, and not only cultural, because indeed he made the impossible possible. He transcended reality, and indeed this was living myth incarnate. So I also fully agree, and you have managed to convey it perfectly well that it is also possible in our case. And the strategy of Reconquista, which we discussed at our event, it is indeed something which not only relies on understanding, on again certain steps of this strategy, but it is something which needs these divine sources of inspiration, strength, and being dare to challenge reality and accomplish it. Of course, it's hard to tell who can be that avatar in our days, but those persons who speak at this event, who I meet in our movement, I can see these reflections in our faces, and I can feel this strength inside of the speakers and the possible chosen ones. So this is how a myth breaks through the wall. And we also heard in the first speech that ASGARDSREI is a wild hunt, and in a second speech about Baron Ungern-Sternberg, he can himself be compared to these either demons of apocalypse, if we refer to this eschatological monotheist tradition, or to our original European one, Scandinavian one, those fellow horsemen surrounding Odin, this wild hunt, something which dark in the skies, which also represented in the symbolics of the festival, and of course goes beyond aesthetic and style. So please, if you have any questions, ask. Yes.
I don't have a question, I just kind of have a comment. Your speech talks a lot about fighting and Bhagavad Gita and fighting and warriors. I just wanted to make a comment that Carl Schmitt, the famous writer, who really is one of the best writer about how to fight liberalism. Carl Schmitt says, in politics, the way to fight is polemics. And Carl Schmitt emphasizes over and over again, if you're a warrior in politics, if you're fighting in politics, the fight is all about polemics. So I had to look up the word polemics, and what does that mean? It means words. The fight is in words. So the fight is about arguments. So if you want to be a good warrior, if you want to be a good fighter, you better have good arguments on every level. I just want to make that comment on how to fight.
Yes, thank you. I think in my speech I already mentioned that Ungern-Sternberg was not so much of a talker. So he was actually said to not be one who could philosophize or writing books or anything. He was a man der Tat. He was a man of action, and of course he did what he could do at best, leading his men into battle and defeating his enemy that was confronting him. And I think that it's also important. I mean, probably we could not even say that he was a politician, because probably he cared not much in politics. He was more of a visionary, of someone who actually has a vision. In his case, it was a religious vision. And I think what we need is have men of action, but also have men of words. And of course, it must be some. We cannot only have, only have the emphasis on one, but not on the other. There must be some equilibrium between action and words, and this is, I think, how our movement must be composed. Not only have philosophers writing books or giving speeches like we do it now, but also have people out on the streets who actually put this into action. These words, This is my belief.
questions? Here in this, in the post-revolutionary Kyiv, we can tell that we have those two kinds of people: people of action, warriors, soldiers, and intellectuals. And sometimes these are two persons in one. So we move forward to achieve this ideal here. And yeah, so it's just a remark to say that this is why we consider this a platform, a springboard for Reconquista, because we see changes, we see new human types, and it always happens before some global historical or even meta-historical shifts. And this bloody Baron, he is indeed quite popular in these third positionist circles. Maybe you also know neo-folk musicians, of course, you know them. And you also maybe heard about this intellectual British theorist of national anarchism, Troy Southgate. He also often published works about lesser known figures of the so-called Third Way, hedonism, and not only beyond philosophy of politics, humanities in general. So he is also quite a fluent musician, and he uses it as a tool to spread awareness about these historical figures. So I think, if not mistaken, because there are many neo-folk projects led by him, this band is called Hair, and then title is like dedicated to Roman Ungern-Sternberg, Baron of Urga, or something like that. And it's like in a lyric, a short description of his life path, which we heard during the report by Hendrik Möbus in many details. Again, it's really tremendous work. Thank you. I think all of us not only enriched knowledge of Baron, but probably exhausted it if we refer to modern available sources. So in this song by her, you can also hear a short autobiography about Khan as an avatar. So again, returning to the central idea of our meeting, the idea of Reconquista. What is, again, we received perfect summaries, so it's really nothing to add, but for the sake of better understanding, what is important most of all in this meta-historical figure of Baron? Is it the synthesis between East and West? Like flexibility, or I know even how he finds a source of inspiration and these vital forces in the East? Or is it an ability to destroy those nihilistic realities of the modern Western world using Eastern sources as a pretext? You mentioned it, that this was a growing disappointment with the West, that he could already witness those growing trends of degeneration. So he even stood behind this actually hopeless cause of monarchism, just to revolt against those modern trends. So what is the most important here, something which we as ears of Reconquista, started by Baron and figures of his kind, what we can learn from this synthesis, revolutionary strategy, or something else?
Yeah, I think most important is to have an open mind, because as you see, he was Baron von Ungern-Sternberg. He was first of all, of course, joining the white counter-revolution, and he was fighting alongside all these other white officers who wanted to topple the Bolshevik government, but he understood that this might not be enough, that even though the Bolsheviks would be gone, it would not be enough to actually turn around the situation, because he understood that Bolshevism was just a symptom of something deeper and bigger, and he really wanted to go to the root of all of this, and wanted to in his point of view, he wanted to save mankind by just, or at least Western civilization, by actually forcing it back to a state of culture and of civilization that he believed was the only right one, this monarchy in his point of view. And this of course was something that probably nobody else agreed with him at this time. Also might counter-revolutionaries would have been happy to just get rid of the Bolsheviks and then just go back to have some nationalist government. But he understood that then this might just be happening again. So he was actually trying to go to, like I said, to the root of it and to reform humanity, push it back on the, like you said, on the road to divinity. And for this sake, he was looking beyond the borders of Western civilization. That's why he arrived at Buddhism and went to Mongolia and tried to find ways how to mix this or how to take this strength, this power from there and use it to reform Western culture, Western civilization, even Western spirituality. And I think we too should not limit ourselves by saying that we should probably just stick to the things that we know and that might have worked in the past. At some point, like I'm from Germany and I know that many people, for instance, they say, we should just do it again like they did in the 1920s, 1930s, but I always think that we should probably try something else too. And in this case, like coming from Germany, in this case it is just having some union with some unity with alliance with forces from Eastern Europe, for instance. That something that in the past was not so very popular among German nationalists, and but I think it's a very healthy addition if we consider doing this, and it will most certainly help us to achieve our goals. And that's what this Baron of Ungern-Sternberg, in my opinion, stands for, to just look beyond what we know and search for the things that we need. And we should do the same, yes.
Thank you very much for your response. It's indeed clear that you prevented me from asking the second question about the revolutionary significance of this figure and speech for the modern right, because you already covered this part. Indeed, topics like this help to overcome stereotypes which are quite popular also in the right-wing movement, not only about Eastern Europe. If you look back at least a decade ago, indeed this idea was not so popular, especially or also in the German right-wing circles. Now times change, and now here in Ukraine we also can feel these winds of history blowing stronger. And again, of course, it is not only about some Russian-Ukrainian conflict, territory disputes, and so on and so forth. For us, it's first of all the window of opportunity. It is a chance for something greater, and for European Reconquista and for the rebirth of the West, which is possible quite probably only by means of looking to the East and finding there some sources of power, of strength for the decadent West. And today we were talking about pagan metaphysics, our own ancient, original heathenism, heathen traditions, Scandinavian traditions, not as rites again, but first of all as a worldview, rooted in our history, of course. We also were talking about religious and metaphysical foundations of Reconquista in the, according to Roman Ungern von Sternberg, his unique version of Buddhism, which is of course nothing similar, nothing known to Eastern people. Again, I will repeat myself a bit. For me, it's also a European person, European archetypes, but they became ever stronger precisely thanks to this unique, syncretic or synthetic, I don't know, combination with the Eastern soul. So he has managed to do it, and both sources of power, of inspiration, European heathenism, pro-Christian traditions, heathen worldview, and Eastern sacred teachings, but reinterpreted, revived on the Western ground. I also fully agree this is something which should be at our disposal here and now for the strategy of this grand European or Western reconquest. So the wild hunt is coming, and this weekend we will welcome it when the gates will open in a night sky. So now I would like to announce this conference part closed and invite you to take part in the first opening musical session of ASGARDSREI Festival, again which will take place at Monterey Club. Pes Noir, our French comrades, extremely original musical band, also inspired not only by French traditionalism and military songs. The band which also looks beyond France, especially in these turbulent for France days. We know that European revolution, this flag which is mentioned here, I mean Bolshevik revolution, it started in France, revolutionary France, 1789. So probably in these turbulent days for France, something else will also start, but in the different direction. So Pes Noir is also one of the bands which reaches this level of discussion and offers alternatives, not only in the music, but also in the profound interviews and intellectual reflections. So again, thank you very much, Fróði, for your excellent speech. It was a great pleasure and again inspiration for us to listen to you. Thank you, Hendrik, very much. Again, it's hard to return back to this social reality. And do not leave it completely. Just please make sure that you will transfer your physical bodies to Monterey Club. And see you tomorrow, maybe at Cossack House, but anyway at Bingo Club at ASGARDSREI Festival. But now we go to Monterey. Thank you very much.